Hello, my name is Adam Bell, and I'm here to teach you how to play Grasping Nettles. This is a world-building game that I have created about building a community and seeing what happens to it over the course of generations. So we're just going to get right into it. Alright, this game can be played with 1 to 6 people. Right now I'm going to blitz through it with just the one person, me, just to show you what exactly is going on. But the first step is to choose like a genre of story of world that you want to build and also flesh out a rough pitch. So what I want to do for this little short playthrough tutorial is I'm going to do a sci-fi story on a generational ship flying through space in search of a new planet home. That's about all we need at this point. You could keep fleshing it out if you enjoy doing that sort of thing, or you could jump right into it. The next step is to define how big the community is. Talk about like, oh, do we want to just do like start with a small village and see what happens to it. In this case, if it's a generational ship, I'm thinking several thousand people. And then from there, you just kind of get right into it. Sitting in front of me is what is called the wheel. So the wheel is the central board of this game, and it has a handful of actions on it that are going to be all of the ways in which we interact mechanically with the narrative that we're developing. The first 3 turns of the game have to be taking one of the 3 pieces that you've set out for the game and placing them on the add change faction space. So add change faction is an action in which you create a new faction for the world, and our 3 playing pieces are each mapped to a faction. So we have to set that mapping at the very beginning. So the first thing you do is you take a playing piece and you just put it right on that space, and then you go through that action. So the faction I'm going to create here is just going to be the farmers. I think in a generational ship, there's probably an entire wing where you are growing food in some sci-fi way, and so this faction is going to be the people that kind of control that. So they'll probably have a good deal of power. Write that down on a note card, and then we'll take the second turn. My second faction is going to go ahead and be the people that are kind of in charge of the helm of the ship, so we're going to call that the steering committee. I want to do something different with the third faction, I think, so this is going to be a group who want to kind of... They were born in space, and so they only know space, and so they don't align with the idea of we should find a planet because they don't know about that. These are going to be called the Starborn. And they might make a mess. An important thing to note for those first 3 add change faction moves is that whenever you are adding a new faction to the world and one of the 3 playing pieces is not mapped to a faction, you're going to go ahead and map your new faction to that piece. So in this case, I've mapped all 3 of them, which you can see here. I've got it listed on a little note card to the side, which is important because this can change over the course of the game. Okay, so now I'm going to walk you through how the rest of the game works. It's pretty simple. On your turn, so you do take turns around the table, or if you're just playing by yourself like I'm doing right now, what you do at the beginning of a turn is you roll a die, and then you pick one of the pieces and move it that many spaces around the board. And the rules for moving are you cannot move counterclockwise, and you cannot go into a space and then back to the space you came from. If you want to land on the same space that you started on, you have to go all the way around the wheel. So I've rolled a 5 here. Let's see where it takes me. I've moved that piece to the add identify issue space. That piece represents the farmers, so what I want to do is create an issue that definitely affects the farmers but can affect anybody. The issue I've added is that the water filters on the ship are failing or starting to fail, and that is a century early, which is definitely going to be a big problem. But the important thing to know is that we're not going to come up with a solution as part of this. This is just introducing the issue, and then if one of the factions decides that they want to do something about it, we'll get to that later. Alright, so I'll roll again. I got a 4. So again, I can pick any of the 3 pieces to move. Right now I'm just kind of grabbing ones and moving them just so I can make sure to get all of the actions. Okay, so now we've moved to Seasons Change. What the Seasons Change action does is it allows you to set a season, and this is less about figuring out like the cycle of weather. This is less about defining fall, winter, spring, summer, though of course you could do that. It's more about defining a feeling that should exist at this current time and thinking about something that like some piece of this culture that like starts to permeate at certain times, right? So what I'm thinking here for a good season on this ship, I think this is going to be called spring cleaning. Like, people haven't experienced spring in a long time because they've been on this ship. But what spring cleaning is this thing that happens every year or a couple of years where everybody kind of goes through all of the different computer modules and other technological things and kind of resets them back to basic. So getting rid of any unnecessary like stuff that's clogging down the computers that run the ship, retuning all of the machinery. This is just a thing. It's like, oh, it's time for spring cleaning, so that's what's kind of happening in the background. And of course, the piece that I'd moved there was the steering committee. So they're kind of at the head of the ship. They're at the head of the outlined power structure. They might not have all the power because, you know, you can't just say that you're in power, but I've rolled a 2, and what that allowed me to do is move the Starborn piece to the play/dictate scene. Because it's just the one player, I probably won't be playing very many scenes. It'll be mostly dictation. So the idea of a scene in this game is that the point of it is to find something new out about one of the note cards on the table. So you pick a note card as the focus, and then you play out the scene until you learn something new that you can then write down on that note card. And if you learned about multiple note cards, that's fine. The scene I'm going to dictate is just, we're going to look at the Starborn and how they interact with spring cleaning. So again, the Starborn are people that don't care about finding a planet. So probably that leads to them rejecting a lot of the processes that started whenever this ship set off. And those processes, they see all of those processes as needing to be reevaluated because they're all intended upon finding a new planet to land on and abandon this ship. So yeah, we just see them staging like a big strike and really mucking up spring cleaning. And spring cleaning is going to take longer this time around. We've got another turn to take. So I'm moving the Starborn piece to start/finish a project. The way projects work is that whenever you land a piece here, that faction will start a project, and then whenever you land that same piece there again, they can finish it, and whoever lands it there can dictate. So you just announce what this faction is trying to accomplish, and then we'll see how it plays out later. But we'll know that that's what they're working on, kind of in the background. The project I'm going to start here, or the Starborn are going to start a kind of propaganda campaign to try to get more people to see things the way that they do, and to see that, like, we don't need to find a planet. I'm just going to place that project note card just by the Starborn so I can keep track of it. There, we've got a 3. 3, I've moved the farmers to add new character, so we're going to learn about somebody. Add new character is exactly how it sounds. You just create a character that exists in the world, and you kind of define their relationship to the active faction. They don't necessarily have to be in the active faction, although often that's what takes place. But they do have to have some sort of relation with them. So I'm going to try to think of somebody related to the farmers. We may as well make a farmer. So the character I've created is Kale Sperry, and they maintain the kale crop. They're a farmer. Okay, so we've moved the Starborn to the add/change faction. And so what that's going to allow me to do is make a new faction in the world. This won't immediately map them to a piece, but maybe we can get to that later. Creating a faction called Big Wrench. They are the mechanics of the ship. We haven't seen much from the steering committee. I've moved the steering committee to the Glimpse Elsewhere space, and so what that's going to let me do is, as a table, we will kind of define a place that's somewhere else. Whenever it's your turn and you move there, you're going to state something about a location somewhere else, and then everybody else is going to add their own sentence to it, and then that's it. It kind of gives you a picture of somewhere else. You're going to roll a die and say that number of sentences about a place elsewhere. So I've rolled a 4. The planet Ebulon exists out in space about 150 years journey from the current position of our ship. The planet is habitable, but is in a very early stage of the evolutionary cycle. There are many dangerous creatures that exist on the planet, this would be a good destination for the ship to land on. Cool. So yeah, that's the glimpse elsewhere. So we've written down the planet Ebulon onto a note card and placed it off to the side. Okay, I've rolled a 6. I've moved the steering committee to add change faction. And so that just lets me remap the pieces themselves. So this yellow spaceship is now going to refer to Big Wrench. I've updated the mapping sheet, and then I just say, like, okay, how is this happening? How do we see this? And what I'm going to say is that the steering committee is busy with spring cleaning. They're busy with, like, just mundane tasks. I don't think they're going to be as interesting, because their most interesting bits are going to be interacting with the Starborn, so we can just get that through the lens of the Starborn, which is an interesting decision from a storytelling perspective, if you ask me. So I want to see what Big Wrench is up to. They're the mechanics. They're the ones actually probably doing most of the work with the spring cleaning and in general. So I think it's important to get that perspective. Okay, so we're going to roll again. I've rolled a 4, so I'm going to move the Starborn to start/end event. Okay, so what we're going to get there is huge backlash starts to happen against the Starborn. There is a lot of people in this ship that, like, believe, I mean, you're taught, just by existing, you're doing important work, living on this ship, because the goal of this ship is to populate a new world. Great. Whenever there's this group coming up and saying, hey, this sucks, let's just stay on the spaceship forever, that's going to be a problem. So there's just like kind of a lot of backlash. People are getting punched. I got a 6. I think I know what I'm going to do with it. And that is take this piece and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And set them on generation advances. So what that does is whenever you land there with a piece, you kind of talk about how that faction fades into the background for now. So we'll say that the farmers, they're dealing with this water filter failing, maybe, hopefully. They're just kind of dealing with the ramifications of that. Not much is going on. So they fade into the background. And then once all 3 pieces land on this space, then we'll move forward. So we don't want to jump forward until all 3 factions are ready, which means until essentially all the players are ready, because we're going to all start moving towards that. I'm going to roll again. Okay, so I've rolled a 4. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 with the Starborn to add a location. I think that's the only other action we haven't done yet. It's, I mean, again, just what it sounds like. We make a location that exists in the world and then talk about how it relates to the active faction. So I think what I want to get to is, like, there's a specific rec room. Like, one of the bigger rec rooms, there's a few pool tables, there's video game shit, there's whatever you would have, board games, tabletop RPGs perhaps. Maybe they're playing Grasping Nettles in space, because it transcends time. But the important thing here is they've kind of taken over this space. This is the Starborn headquarters. This is where they meet. This is where they discuss their plans. And now I'm going to roll a couple more times here. Perfect. We've got a 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now the Starborn are fading into the background, and it's because we know what they're doing. So we don't need to add more right now. And then I'm going to roll again. Cool, we got a 3. 1, 2, 3. And Big Wrench is doing the work. All 3 pieces have moved to the generation advances space, which means the generation is going to advance. And what that entails is you're going to take turns looking at all the note cards on the table and determining what happens to them over this time skip. So you're going to look at each of the note cards. Like, on your turn, you think of one to say, okay, I think this is what happens. You explain what happens, and then you update that note card. If your explanation talks about a couple of note cards together, I mean, this is an interconnected world, so that is going to happen. That's fine. You just mark all of those. Let's start with this issue. The water filter is failing a century early. Nobody handled that. No, we didn't. I think that just gets worse. And so, like, rationing water becomes a pretty important thing on the ship. Until this can get fixed, until they can, like, make a new filter. I think that's why it's a century early, because they just don't have what they need to create, like, the replacement filter yet, because it wasn't supposed to fail. So we're just going to say, yeah, that gets worse, and people start rationing water pretty heavy. So yeah, after you've updated that, then you just flip it over so that you know that it's done. And then you would keep going and doing each of them. You would talk about how the factions progress, determine if they maintain their place in the limelight, or maybe if they kind of lose power. Whatever, any of the projects that weren't finished, you can decide if they get finished or abandoned, or if they continue on into the next generation. For characters, you kind of determine, maybe they die as time passes, maybe they take on like a teaching role that guides the new generation, or maybe they just stay where they are and they're 20 years older, but they're still the person. They're still that person. Yeah, and then once you're done with that, you take a break. Everybody walks away, gets some water, checks their phone, talks to each other about how lives are going, and you come back and you do it again. And then you keep doing that until at the beginning of one of these generation changes, you say, hey, is this the last generation? Are we finished playing today? And if you are, then you say, are we finished playing in general? Or do we want to come back to this and play some more Grasping Nettles later? That's up to you. And then from there, of course, you've got a world, you've got kind of a timeline depending on how many generations you played through. And you can do whatever you want with that. Play it in a new game, think about it, and be like, damn, that was a cool spaceship. Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this was an informative video on how to play Grasping Nettles. And I hope you like the game.